All right, everybody. Thank you for attending today. This is Nephio's first SIG Network Architecture meeting. Let me display the agenda here. All right. As it happens, the TSC, as far as I know, hasn't met yet since our in-person meeting, which means we don't have actually any official rules for how we pick a chair or a vice chair. So I think we're going to have to defer that. But I figured I want to meet anyway. I want to get the ball rolling, and we'll just have to defer that to the next meeting. Hopefully, it can happen then. But welcome everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm John Bellameric from Google, and along with some other folks, I've been one of the people trying to get this Nephio project off the ground. So the other thing, I guess, talk a little bit about the meeting logistics. I know I had to admit a whole bunch of you, click a button, admit, which is kind of annoying for me. So maybe, after this meeting, right after this meeting is the SIG release meeting, and all kind of the administrative discussions around what tools we use and things like that will happen in that meeting. For anybody who has opinions and is interested, maybe we'll move to something else. The primary thing somebody was asking about how to join the calls without a Gmail address, but like with their work address, I guess. So there's two things. One is the way, for security reasons, Google Meet doesn't let just anybody join. Well, it lets anybody join, but a human has to admit them. And the people who can come in without a human admitting them are the people who are logged in with their Google account that matches the address that they subscribed to the mailing list with, which is what, on the invite list for this meeting. Unless we move to Zoom or something that has a password instead of a tighter controls. For now, if you have a work Google account, which some people do and some people don't, it all depends on your company and whether they subscribe to Google's workspace stuff. Then whatever account you use for subscribing to the mail list, you can join that Google group. I guess the question was, can you join? You can join it with any email, and you'll get the emails from. You'll get the emails as much as you want, but if that account's not a Google account, it doesn't work to let you join Meet without being admitted. So, so it's a little bit awkward. Like I said, the next meeting is the SIG release meeting for the tooling, and it's not on my agenda, but we can add it to the agenda and we can talk about that because I know that's caused some frustration for some people.
John, specifically I asked the reason because even the mailing list, right, you need to have an invite to join via the official email. Otherwise, if I try to just join the group via the official email, it doesn't allow me. Right? It'll go and see that there's no Google account or not. Unless there is an invite, I cannot join via official email. So that's the reason I subscribe via the personal emails right now.
So you weren't able to just go and join with an email address that wasn't?
No. Unless I have subscribed to other Google groups via official email, but I should have an invite specifically for that. That's the only way I can.
Maybe I did something wrong in my settings. There's like 500 settings for groups, so I may have screwed something up when I created that. So let's just take a note of that.
I think this is Bob. I think it forced me to sign up as my Gmail address.
Yeah.
By default, and I didn't know how to get around it, so I just did it that way. So.
Yeah, no, that is how I got it as well, Bob. So, but I've seen other Google groups. I'm part of other Google groups. The problem is the meeting comes in my personal email ID, right? So then my official calendar is kind of out.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's not the intent. So there's two things I'll do. One is I will also add calendar for subscription links. I think Kino was asking about this over the weekend. So it won't be group.io, but it'll be something you could subscribe to in any calendar tool. Just
Okay.
a link. But still, it should be letting anybody join the mailing list. We use it all the time with Kubernetes, and it's not been an issue. So I must have done something wrong in my setup of that. So we'll have to figure that out.
I was actually able to join using my my work email address. So it's a Cisco address, and but I do have a Google account tied to that Google address. So maybe that's it.
Okay, you were really echoey, Charles, so it was hard to understand what you
So
were
what
saying.
he was saying is he has an official. He was able to sign in via the official email, but he already has an official email tied with Google account somehow with the existing password. I think that is the reason he said he's able to sign up.
I see. Okay. Okay. Well, we'll try to. I'll look into that and see if I can fix something. Is there anybody who's a volunteer who wants to help me test it? I mean, I guess I can just create an email address somewhere and test
Yeah,
it.
I can volunteer for that. So let me know, John. So
Okay. 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 I gotta write your name down. I spelled it wrong.
how do I chat here to put my email address?
I'm sure if it's in the mail list, I can get it off of there.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So the main point of this group, like I said, I think maybe somebody joined after this. We don't have actually the official rules yet for how to pick a chair and a co-chair. So I'm just facilitating the meeting here. I probably, I will probably try regularly, but actually this isn't probably a SIG I'll be as closely involved in as some of the others. But basically, this group is the primary group with the sort of telco expertise on what the what the requirements are that this project needs to satisfy. And so what I imagine coming out of this group is sort of specifications around how to build, what use cases to build, what the details of those use cases as far as what requirements they need to meet, and kind of the overall architectures of here are the different, taking the kind of 3GPP architectures and translating them into something concrete for this project, which then the automation machinery group would take and make into actual CRDs, controllers, and things like that. So kind of putting together the plans for, well, we need this function here, this function here, this function here, spread across, say, these different types of clusters, and talk through some of those use cases. So this is what I think we'd need to come out with sooner rather than later, is something I would call like a steel thread, is a term I've heard used, or just minimum kind of viable use case, something that forces us as a community, as a group, to solve problems. And so we have something concrete and that actually works, that comes out the other end of that process. And when that is done, we can call ourselves at some version, whether that's 1.0 or 0.9 or whatever it is we feel comfortable with as a community calling it. It will be something that actually is useful for some potentially narrow but real use case. So that's something I would look to this group to come up with. And I will tell you what I'm sort of working on. So just to sort of clarify my role, I'm going to be really focused on the platform SIG, where I'm trying to get some running software up, some piece of software up and running that sort of is the shell or the container for the real telco knowledge to be deployed in, that comes out of the automation machinery, this group's requirements, automation machinery deliverables. We get into that shell. But as part of that, I'm also very focused on what we've talked about at the meeting of the configuration as data piece, which is also something we're working on principles for, right? So we talked a lot in the summit about this kind of iterative, cooperative development of a configuration for a given network function or topology of network functions. And there are a lot of problems to solve, sort of not telco specific problems, but simply application deployment, configuration management type of problems to solve in order to achieve that in sort of the vision that we have. So those two pieces, that platform piece and that configuration of data piece, the underlying machinery mechanisms are where I'm going to be focusing. Stephen, who's on the call, just to give an idea of where the folks from Google anyway are focusing, Stephen is very much going to be focusing on the API machinery SIG, and he's got a telco background much more so than me, and so that's the sort of implementation of things that come out of this group, but in real code. So what I just, like I said, to get the ball rolling, I'm going to build out and hope to demonstrate in 2 weeks' time at the next meeting some sort of bootstrap platform. It won't be necessarily fully open source. It'll probably run on GKE. There'll be a lot of shortcuts taken, so it won't be it'll be like a 0.01 version, and that will deliver a so my background, I did a lot of stuff with Core DNS, so that's a very familiar application for me. So it's not maybe a telco network function in the sense of a control plane function or something like that, but it does provide us some interesting examples. So I'm building out a scenario, and we'll actually have, I intend to have some deliverable example way to take that application, deploy it across a couple of clusters through an automation controller, and configure it using all of these mechanisms we've been talking about. So that I intend to do in the Nefio open source repositories. So kind of I won't call it seed code, but it's an initial seed proof of concept I want to at least provide. I know coming out of the summit, there was a lot of excitement and energy, and people were a little disappointed that Google was talking about providing seed code, later this year. So we're trying to provide something quicker than that. That's maybe not as tailored to this particular use cases, but at least can help people form their mental model of what we're trying to build here, or what our vision is, and help the community evolve that vision. So that's really about all I have to say in this call. Like I said, we haven't picked a chair yet, and so at this point, I don't see anybody else has added things to the agenda, but I just open it up for public discussion, thoughts on that. Yeah, Tal.
Yeah, so just a quick note that you mentioned 3GPP and what you're working on. So sounds like our immediate focus is, sorry, just a little echo here. Our immediate focus is we're going to be laser focused on 5G RAN, right? That was the use case that was presented first, and that is what we're going to focus on first, even in architecture. Correct?
That sounds right to me. Again, that's kind of up to the community, and like I said, we don't have a chair right now, so we don't have a process for deciding that right now. But as far as I'm concerned, and Stephen probably should chime in here, there's some work going on that he's got going on around taking some of the open source 5G core and making that available in this process as well. So when I say a steel thread, does that mean SMF, AMF, UPF deployed across multiple clusters through some automation controller? And if we do that, what we need to start figuring out in this group, first pick that thread, right? And then if that's it, that's the one we've talked about before, so I'm saying that. Then we need to start getting down to the nuts and bolts of like, okay, what is the same about an AMF from vendors A, B, C, and D? Maybe some of that's already captured in the standards. But what of that, and how do we need to feed into the SIG 2, or we shouldn't use numbers because we're going to lose track of them, but the automation machinery SIG, some of those requirements so that they can develop a CRD that says, okay, this CRD represents the commonalities. Here's how it hooks up to a vendor-specific CRD, and here's the interplay of a controller that understands the common piece, the automation controller understands the common piece, and some operator maybe understands the vendor piece. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but I want to actually, that's why we need to do it, right? We need to like just do it, and then we'll learn stuff, and we'll get it wrong, and we'll go and fix it. And so that's kind of, I'm trying to find what this group thinks would be a useful but small enough use case that we can start it and iterate on it. And what we've been using so far internally that we're and Stephen maybe should talk more about this. I don't know all the details, but as far as providing seed code eventually, I think it's around that use case of AMF, SMF, UPF. Is that right, Stephen? Is that what you're thinking? Or?
Yeah. So the 5G core, not 5G RAN. So it's a little easier to find 5G core open source software to be used. Go ahead, I guess.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll follow up quickly. You're mentioning core components, but I assume we're also thinking about CU, DU, maybe even RAM components, because the core is easy. Let's put it that way. Core components are pretty easy. They're more or less standard workloads for Kubernetes. I'll also mention, if we are going in that direction, I'm going to volunteer a team member of mine who we experimented quite a bit with what's available in open source with 5G and also some 4G to try to build something end-to-end, really, including those CUDU components. So we actually did build a pretty end-to-end is hard to define exactly, but we do have. My colleague managed to build, we have the core, and we have all the way to actually connecting a phone with a SIM to it using open source components on Kubernetes. So in order to not duplicate work, I can invite him sometime to give a demo and kind of a Q&A over which components he chose and why and how he kind of tied it together. All our code is on GitHub too, so there are a few repositories that we can, that could be like an implementation starting point possibly. And Stephen, maybe joining the work that you're doing with it as well.
Right. No, that would be great, because we actually haven't located that many 5G RAN open source projects. So if you have that would be a great contribution. So as we said, RAN and core are the two domains that we're looking at. From our side, from Google side, we've done a lot more on core, as you said, because it's easier. But then if you have the RAN components and you have end-to-end, so you have RAN and core, that's definitely something we'd like to take a look for sure. Go ahead, John.
Well, I was going to say the meeting on Wednesday morning. I don't know if that's too short notice for your colleague, but I don't think there's an extensive agenda yet for that. So that would be phenomenal to get things going quickly if they're able to attend. It's Wednesday, is that right, Stephen?
Wednesday. Well, Wednesday morning Pacific time.
Yeah, 9 a.m. Same time as this call, but on Wednesday.
And it is this week, so that would be a great time to lay out the details on the plan.
So I'm going to give you an action item, Kyle. A demo presentation discussion.
Okay, so for this SIG, in 2 weeks, right? Because we have a bi-weekly schedule.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
You want to do it for this SIG, or you want to do it for the automation machinery SIG in 2 days?
That's a good question. I kind of feel like for this week, we're going to have the same people in all the meetings. We're all trying to figure out what the SIGs are.
Right. I mean, I think both SIGs would be interested in, right? And
Yeah.
you've got this group interested in seeing that end to end, and but you've got the automation machinery SIG trying to say, hey, well, we need to build something, and is this a starting point?
So let's think about that. And let's set a date and put it on the agenda for the meeting so I can be sure. So we think maybe for SIG number 2, or I don't know. I feel like this is the right SIG possibly, because if you look at if we're thinking of architecture, well, we have 2 architectures in mind here, right? The nephew architecture, but also the use case architecture. So
right. So this SIG, the intent is, and Vance, we'll get to your comment in a minute, which is useful. I think that this SIG, I think our intention with the SIGs, and again, we haven't gotten this is actually, there's no official SIGs yet, because we don't have all the stuff from the TSC yet. So this is all sort of a preemptive, hopeful, optimistic concurrency here. So the idea is that this SIG is really about those use case architectures, and the platform SIG is about the Nefio underlying infrastructure architecture, and then the APIs that implement the network architecture and are sort of consumed by the platform is the automation machinery SIG. So I would almost think of platform as the Nefio architecture, like the large pieces, and then SIG automation machinery as the pieces that are put into that platform, put into that architecture, and serve a particular role to implement the network architectures on the network, but not, that's different than the software architecture of Nefio itself.
Yeah, so it sounds like this is the right SIG for it. So maybe we should set it 2 weeks from today.
Sure. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So then what we'll do, so just to try and start to get our processes, our organizational logistics in here, we can say next meeting agenda. And so I'll move this up there. And we'll plan on that being on the next meeting's agenda. And then I also want, I have okay, that's the goal I have, is to exercise that basic user journey we talked about with a simple application. So it's the application's only there to serve the purpose of surfacing certain requirements. And what I will do, my other action item that's not really for the next agenda, but I'm going to also publish, I have it here by the end of the week. I have an internal document I've written with about 80% of what I want to do, and but foolishly I did it using, as I worked through it, I did it using some things like we have like workload identity and using Google Cloud Source repositories. Like I need to redo it all using GitHub as my repositories and things like that. So I need to do a little bit of cleanup on it. And so I will publish the I want to do that this week. And then, you know, I don't know that I would be able to adjust to any comments before the meeting in 2 weeks, but at least we, you know, people will get a preview of what I'm planning to demonstrate. All right. We got a bunch of hands. Vance raised a point before we go to the hands in chat, if those of you saw it. Multi-cloud federation. So yes, I think that could be an interesting avenue, like to take like this little demo I'm talking about and put it across clusters on different clouds. I think that would be interesting. So there's a couple layers we talked about in the summit, and one is infrastructure automation, that is creating clusters in different clouds or different sites of a given cloud, you know, with like a mech type of deployment. That's a harder problem, actually, even though it's an underlying problem. And so, at least for my experiment, where I'm just trying to demonstrate the user flow, I'm kind of deferring that a little bit, but I think we can possibly start talking about that. This gets back to that steel thread. What is the steel thread? Does a steel thread include provisioning clusters on three different clouds? Does it include, it's going to be hard to provision clusters in like a mech environment because you need hardware for that. But obviously, ultimately, we need to go. But
so,
go ahead.
Sorry, but yeah, I think you're focusing too much on the problems of federating disparate clouds. What my point would be, let me back off a little bit. That this is about management architecture, right? So, you know, like in the 3GPP, we've got the service-based architecture that, you know, it defines how the 5G core connects and et cetera. And then you have the service-based management architecture, which is an overlay that handles all the management aspects. And it's the management aspects that are our focus, right? So I think we should be pretty clear about that. And fulfillment, assurance, and billing or accounting, whatever you want to call it, are the three pillars that need to be solved. And the challenge is to provide commonality across this disparate, like you've mentioned, and Tal mentioned hybrid public-private, and that was certainly my intention. You know, so there's all these different deployment scenarios. We need to bring commonality to it so that everything can be fulfilled, assured, and billed, and with the same amount of ease and accuracy.
Okay. Can you? I'm trying to. Can you? Given that for me, maybe everybody else is like, yeah, that sounds awesome. For me, I'm not. Like I said, like I keep repeating, my experience is not telco, other than brushing up against it occasionally, having worked for like a company that sold something that was a network function, and you know, so when you say fulfillment and assurance, are you talking about, the words I would use maybe would be day one provisioning and day two management? Are those the same things? Or because when you when you go to billing, now you're talking business process.
Actually, these are all business processes. So to give you some perspective, I'm a career-long telco guy, but I'm also a work stream lead in the TM Forum, Technical Architecture. And so in the TM Forum, we have a business process map and an information framework for the business of being a communication service provider. And the three legs of operations are, as I say, fulfilling, and that means everything you need to do to put the stuff in place to support the customers, and then assurance, which is, you know, day two, keeping all that stuff up and running and delivering the service that you guaranteed. And then finally, you need to get paid for it. But and you may think that doesn't apply, but it kind of does, really, because you need to if you substitute the word counting, it may make more sense, right? We need to, how many resources were used and et cetera, and even if it's interdepartmental, there's some accounting to be done. And so, yeah, they're business processes. But if like you need to think about assurance as an important aspect of what needs to get done, and to run the business, we need to handle not only putting it in place, but keeping it assured, and knowing what got used and where.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And where I'm trying to understand, and it may not be something we can do in this 2 hours, especially we have other hands, but like I think this is good discussion that we'll get to as we start to write some documents and things like that. What I'm trying to understand is where the role. So this project has a certain scope and domain that we have to be careful to draw the scope of this project to something that's solvable, and so it has to then provide those whatever. It's not going to solve the whole business all 3 of those business processes, right? It's a piece of it, and what I'm trying to understand is what piece of it is it, and what are the things. And this is, I think, something this group probably needs to define: is what is the scope of the project, and what are the northbound interfaces it needs to provide to be a player in that ecosystem of fulfilling those, like you said, you want that, creating a management continuum, or you want like so you want a more consistent view across those different multi-cloud environments. So yeah, defining what this project will likely provide some part of that consistent view. I don't imagine it's going to provide that entire consistent view, but I don't maybe know enough about it to know the answer to that question. And I would love for this group to work to define what the scope should be, and within that scope, what should those interfaces look like that can be consumed. Am I understanding your point? Does that make?
Yeah, basically, and I won't belabor it anymore. But what I would like is to get information modeling on the agenda, because that's the big hammer that's going to solve the problems.
Okay, so can I put your name next to this agenda item for next week?
Sure.
This is actually the right topic for this SIG. So that's a good thing that you raised. Obviously, you have to get a little more detail as you go, but then what Ben said is probably what we expect SIG 1 to actually come in and give us more requirements and refinements on the focus.
Awesome. So let me look at the hands here. So so Vance, I just put that on there. Like, this is an open document. Well, it's open for edits to anybody who's in the group, and it's anybody in the world can make suggestions, and anybody in the group can accept them. So if that doesn't work for you, I can open it up to the world, which is what I originally did. But like, sometimes, generally there aren't vandals, but you never know. So it just makes it a little bit. And sometimes there's accidental edits, like people just hit their keyboard and don't realize they're editing the file. So anyway, if it's a problem, let me know. We'll just open it up to the world. So anyway, the queue, we have, I don't know how to say your name, Yao?
Joao?
João, yeah, it's João. Thank you. So just posing here questions regarding the CRD. So the objective is to create some, let's say, general CRDs, right? That could be used by the whatever vendor we bring in, right? So, and commercial vendors is what we are targeting here, not to, let's say, some open source 5G core. Of course, it's a baseline, yes, to have something, right? But the objective is for the Nokias, Ericssons of this world, right, to chime in. And the question remains here. So, because at least from my knowledge, and I have more on Nokia and Ericsson due to RFQ, we are in this moment. They have different approaches of handling the orchestration, right? So Ericsson is more, let's say, a legacy vendor, where they still believe that Etsy will handle and adapt the framework to handle the CNFs alongside with VNFs. So their approach is to use a VNF manager in between to do what a VNF manager is supposed to do, right? The same as they did for the last 20 years or 10 years for the VMs. And Nokia, at least from my knowledge, is more on the, let's say, cloud native approach, where they eliminated VNFM from the picture for the CNFs, and they do everything from the NFVO, let's say, which well, handles the Helm charts in practice and everything. So my question was that, how are you going to tackle these, let's say, different approaches here? Are we going to try to impose our view on the vendors, or wouldn't it be better to, let's say, collect some more input from each vendor and try to find a common ground? That's, sorry for the long explanation.
Yeah, no, so I think what we're trying to do is a new approach. It's perhaps a little closer to the Nokia approach, but still different in and of itself. So our intent is not to, I mean, it's an open source project. Those companies are joining and they're going to be involved, and as a community, we'll evolve we'll evolve what the product looks like. But the intent is to use Kubernetes as the orchestrator, not some other VNFM or something like that. The intent is that the methodology will be declarative and actively reconciled. So we have A2 management. The intent will be that the configurations are stored in a way that we can operate on them before they are pushed out to the individual Kubernetes API servers, and that we can operate on them both with humans and with automation tools. So those are kind of the core pillars of the project. And in so much as vendors are interested in participating in the project and aligning with those principles, we love to have them. We're not going to water down those principles to support existing methodologies, because kind of the whole point is let's try this with a new approach. And it's not a brand new approach. I mean, people have been building operators for 5 years now, right? And so much of this is understood to some extent. Much of this has point solutions for specific apps, for specific layers in that layered chart of automations. But putting it all together and getting it all to work well together smoothly and cleanly, and combining that with sort of pre-configuration before pushing it out to the live state of the Kubernetes API server, and doing validity checks on it and consistency checks on it, and doing it in a cross-vendor way is new, right? And it's hard, and it's a vision, and we're not guaranteed to succeed, but we're guaranteed to advance the state of the art, and that is as long as we put the effort in. And so I believe we've got a really good chance of success, but it's going to be hard, and I think we have to do it. So I mean that's my opinion. There are other hands up. Who's next? Where's the queue? I lost my queue.
Fabrizio.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just would like to start with a comment and then with a question. I mean, the comment is on the information modeling discussion by Vance. I totally agree with him. It is important for us to define which is the scope of the project, and I think that deployment and assurance are really the scope of this work. Maybe before the information modeling, we should work as a first step on one of the topics that we have in the agenda that, in my understanding, is an important thing to start. That is the use case. So we should start with the use case, and then we can go to the information modeling related to the use case. And this is the comment. The question is, in the next meeting, you are going to present us the core DNS use case. And I have also seen that you are going to publish the document describing the scenario. Is that document, let me say, could be a template on the use case? I mean, it is important, I think, for us to define how to write down the use case, to understand the level of details, and actually the kind of use case, the scope of the use case we would like to work with. I'm wondering if that document could be a sort of prototype template for the use case. And if not, maybe we should also think to define something in that direction.
That's a great point. Yes, that's my intent, because a lot of times these things it's so hard to, it's an iterative process of like, how do we get started? So I'm trying to get something started, get the ball rolling. It may not hit the mark for people in this group, right? Like I said, it's not my background necessarily, but I've been working on this project for really close for a year now, among other things. And so it's not like I'm completely ignorant. And I do know networking, and I know enterprise network management, enterprise network automation. So, I believe there's some value in it. Basically, that would be, my intent would be, here's an example of one way to do this. And maybe it's insufficient, and maybe there'll be better, somebody else will come up with a better way, but at least it gets the ball rolling on how to do that. So absolutely, I will have that by the end of the week, hopefully midweek. But because I do, like I said, I have it mostly written up in, but I need to tweak it some. And then in another 2 weeks, I hope to actually demonstrate it operational.
Okay, it is important. I totally agree with you. It is an interactive process. We should start with something, maybe with that document. We can look at that document, try to understand if it is the right way to describe our use cases, and then go in the direction that Vance said before, because I really think that the scope is that one, and deployment and assurance. But we need to start, and I am happy that that document on core DNS could be the first step of this process.
Yeah, I think that the thing that'll be a little bit different from, so to me, these use cases, their whole point is to surface requirements and problems to solve. And the problems I'm trying to solve are a little more focused on like general purpose, like we've talked about this concept of like automation tools operating on a package. And in order to do that, there has to be some interface between that package and that automation controller. There has to be some common language. And there becomes a question of, does that common language, what does it look like? Does it look more like what the automation controller wants, or does it look more like what or is it more package oriented? And so we're trying to tease out this, and the likely answer is going to be there are situations where one or the other is more appropriate, and eventually we'll learn what those are. But my point is, like, my use case will be a starting point, but my focus is slightly different maybe than what this group is interested in. So, it'll be a starting point. And
yeah, totally understood.
Yeah. All right. Cynthia?
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to reconfirm the earlier discussion we had during the conference. I just want to make sure that my understanding is correct. So Nefio is going to focus on the CAS layer and above. So Nefio itself is not focusing on getting the bare metal up and running with the OS installation as well as the CAS stack on top of it. It just focuses on the NF on top of the CAS platform. Is that my understanding correct?
So,
can you confirm that?
Yes. Somebody trying to say something? Oh, I'm hearing an echo. I guess I'm hearing myself. I like to hear myself, not that much. but when I say infrastructure, what I'm talking about is not OS layer. The assumption is that there is some sort of cloud provider, be it public or private, some sort of manager. I mean, it could be AWS APIs, it could be Google Cloud APIs, it could be OpenStack APIs that provisions clusters. It could be cluster API, whatever it is. We have a way to provision. So sort of this starts at, I want to provision a cluster. When I say infrastructure, I want to provision a cluster. I want to provision nodes under that cluster. But we know that there are certain vendor workloads, at least, that might be opinionated about the fabric that cluster is attached to. They need a VLAN. They need VRF Lite configured. They need a BGP sessions configured, and those are going to involve configurations in the top of rack switch. So we have to extend past a little bit our normal comfort zone in Kubernetes of nodes to something more opinionated on the infrastructure, but more we're providing a framework for that to be possible than we're necessarily modeling all of that ourselves. And so that's, that's just the facts of the world we're in, that we need that level of opinionation on the infrastructure.
Yeah, so we don't do OS installations. We don't bring up the machines. We don't install couplets. So those are things.
Yeah, that's what I want to just confirm, right? So CAS layer, the Kubernetes itself, right? Let's say Red Hat OpenShift or VMware Tanzu or whatever Wind River, whatever the CAS platform, right? That at least for the private workloads. So you are not trying to provision those things. It is basically going to provision the network functions on top of those CAS layer.
We would like to provide an orchestration framework such that we can orchestrate creation of those things, but we are not going to try to replicate the functionality of those things. Those things, and that's way too big, I think, as evidenced by the fact that there's so many projects that have done that and tried, and it's very difficult. But we would like to expose those underlying things. And I chatted a little bit about, for example, Crossplane is a API infrastructure layer within Kubernetes that could is another open source project that could potentially provide a mechanism for interfacing with some of these cluster provisioners. So having a cluster provisioner in an infrastructure provisioner, Kubernetes-based declarative infrastructure provisioning layer is an important component. It's loosely coupled, so it's not explicitly necessary. You could, and this is what I'm saying in my use case, I'm not going there yet. I'm saying manually provision these clusters, boom, boom, boom. And then I'll put the network function on them. I have to be made aware that they exist, and there's a way to do that. But I would in the ultimate vision, it's you have that declarative Kubernetes-based representation of that infrastructure. You have the declarative Kubernetes-based representation of the network functions, and because they're they're both in KRM format, their configurations, we can reason about them at the same time. So we can have an automation controller that says, you need you need UPFs in all clusters in all sites in the Northeast. There's 400 sites in the Northeast, and I can create clusters in each of those sites, and then I can install a UPF on each of those clusters. So we want to get there, but we're not going to duplicate the functionality of that lower layer stack. We're going to consume that lower layer stack.
So to extend on what Senthil was asking, Senthil, I think this is something you and we spoke to Kandan about it, right? Like we were talking in the context of DU and CU.
Yes.
And we're wondering that, hey, look, these kind of workloads require certain configurations at the BIOS level. You need to go and make sure the settings are there. I think the answer we got was, hey, we already have it in our Google Cloud, is what he said. But
that's what Kandan said, but assume Vish, right? So I've seen configurations where you have to make BIOS configuration first in order to deploy a workload.
Yes.
Once you do the BIOS configuration, you have to reinstall the OS. That means that unless Nephew focuses installing the OS also, it's not going to work. So that's what I was.
Yeah.
That's what I was coming at, right? For core, you are absolutely fine that you can just do the workloads on top of the cache layer. For when it comes to RAN, it's even further more tuned with a lot of BIOS settings, and the OS configuration has to sit on top. So you have to know prior to what kind of workload you're going to run in order to provision the OS and the BIOS perfectly for that. That's
Yeah.
how
So this is, I think, I don't know if Sana's here, but Sana from TELUS, and she's emphasized this in multiple calls. I've talked to her like in panels and I said, Daniel, we're running low on time, so we'll get the. I just want to say this is where Sana would come in if she were here and say, well, the workload vendors need to clean up their act and not be so dependent on very narrow specific hardware settings, right? We're trying to move the industry from a bespoke artisanal creation of a network to a cloud consumption model. And a cloud consumption model, you give something up. You gain something, but you give something up. You gain flexibility, you give up some control. And
Okay.
so, like, I don't know that we are going to succeed at doing that. That's a very difficult challenge. There's reasons why it's done the way it is. It's not just arbitrary, but like, let's try to shift. Let's try to shift. Daniel.
So I know is waiting, but quick comment just on this. Is this okay, Daniel?
Yeah, you will owe me one towel. So
I owe you a few probably, but just to point out there, we don't have to solve the BIOS configuration problem, but what we can do, at least in this SIG, is define a CRD for defining these BIOS requirements. Now, whatever platform you end up using, they'll have their own functional operator that would be able to read it and maybe do something with it. And just to remind us all that, we have a bifurcation in our architecture. We have management clusters and workload clusters. Some of our CRDs and operators will be in the management cluster. So they can be the chicken before the egg, right? So they would be able to define things that the cluster some other operator will install the cluster using those. But then other operators will have to do with what's actually on the workload and running through too. So we don't have to solve the entire world in the Nephew reference implementation, but we could define these endpoints, CRDs, where it can plug into some sort of other platform, right?
Mhm.
That's my point. Sorry, Danny.
no, actually, it actually just came in time because I was about to say this almost the same thing. So we need to be able to assume that the day zero of Nephew doesn't start with the use case day zero, and then there's an underlying infra that popped up magically. So we need to have the logic, even though we don't necessarily have to build the code for it, that the day zero of a cloud includes how to manage the infra, to spin up the infra or consume the infra so that we are able to deploy it and then be able to use a use case. So I think the use case is valid to understand all the underlying pieces we need to build, but we can't assume those pieces are there and that if magically everybody will be running an AWS Outpost or a Google Rack or something like this. That needs to be defined. Not necessarily and I agree with you, John, you don't want to yet again spin another use case around how to build bare metal systems, because we're going to end up with our 26th. So we have to find. Maybe some people can propose some of their platforms, which actually is going to be good enough, but we need to be taking that into account. Otherwise, we'll miss one of the big problems we had. So, because even if I have the greatest CRD for a use case like a 5G core, but then one needs to have accelerators, and you don't know how to install the accelerators from your bare metal deployment, or then you're running something on a Google Cloud or that doesn't have the same underlying capabilities for I/O than it has in AWS. So you need to be able to assume. So how do you deploy those applications? Those parameters?
Absolutely. Like in the way I think about it is like, the higher level layers need to express clearly their demands of the lower level, and the lower level needs to advertise clearly what demands they can satisfy, and then it's up to some software to match and those demands and those capabilities. The other thing that I want to emphasize is that we do need to keep it decoupled. Like, I don't want to not be able to progress with network function automation because we haven't figured out infrastructure automation.
Mhm.
So that's what I mean by, like, we need to be able to also manually create all that infrastructure and then automate the network function on top of it. The network function automation should be indifferent to where this infrastructure came from, whether it was automated or manual. That's my main point. And then we can solve the problems individually.
Agree. Totally agreed with you, John.
Awesome.
To be honest, today at ITF and the first transport end-to-end transport slicing meeting, there was actually how to model cloud resources so they actually can know how to create end-to-end slices using cloud capability. So it's not something far-fetched. So.
Okay.
Just a quick comment, John, on that. Yes, decoupling is the right word, but I think another way to think of it is disaggregation and aggregation. Whether we want to or not, this is the biggest challenge of telco, I think, that the components are very vertically integrated.
Yes.
We don't like this, but it's a fact. So yes, we need to decouple the implementation, but we want to to aggregate again the packaging for it, right? So because this is our problem right now. We deal with totally different domains, different technologies, installing the cluster. Let's not even talk about day 2 management of an installed cluster, but then the workloads themselves. So I call this bifurcation. We always have to kind of have an eye looking on both sides, and different domains, different problems, but in the end, it's the same workload that we want to run. It's challenging.
Absolutely. Okay, we're out of time, but thank you, everyone, and hopefully next session we'll be able to pick a chair and a vice chair. We'll have a way to do that.
Right.
Anybody who's interested in project administration, tooling, release management, we're going to that meeting right now. Bye-bye. Thank you.